The cowboy had only meant to cross the woods by nightfall, but he felt it the eyes of a hunter following his every step. Each rustle of leaves, each breaking twig made his heart hammer harder. He wasn't chasing anyone. Someone was chasing him, and when he finally caught a glimpse between the trees, his breath stopped. It wasn't a posse, not a rival gunslinger. It was a woman, an Apache warrior, bow drawn, silent as death. Her face was streaked with war paint, her braids tied with feathers, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. He had heard stories of ambushes, of warriors hunting intruders. But he had never heard of being hunted alone by a woman who looked at him as if she already owned his fate. Night fell, and the lonely woods became a cage. He tried to run, but she tracked him like shadow to moonlight. He aimed his revolver once, but couldn't pull the trigger. Something in her stare told him she wasn't just hunting prey. She was testing him. And when dawn came, when his strength broke, and he collapsed against the trees, she stepped out of the mist, her bow lowered. She didn't kill him, she chose him. In the wild heart of the West, hunted and haunted, a cowboy would find the most dangerous choice of his life, not death, but marriage. Jacob Matthews had been riding for 3 days when he reached the edge of Willow Creek, a frontier town clinging to existence like dust on a windowsill. The year was 1872, and the West still belonged as much to the Apache as it did to any white settler. Jacob pulled his hat low against the evening sun, his horse snorting and pawing at the dusty ground. Behind him lay a failed cattle drive and debts that followed him like vultures. Ahead, somewhere beyond the pine-covered mountains, waited new ranching territory where a man could start fresh. He had served 2 years as a cavalry scout before the restlessness took hold. The uniform never fit right, and taking orders from men who had never seen real combat sat bitter in his mouth. So he bought himself out, took his horse and rifle, and joined the stream of drifters heading west. Now, at 26, Jacob carried everything he owned in his saddlebags: a few dollars, ammunition, jerky, and the kind of stubborn hope that kept men moving when staying put meant dying slow. The bartender at Willow Creek's only saloon was a grizzled man named Thompson who had lost his left ear to a Comanche raid 5 years back. He leaned across the bar when Jacob ordered whiskey, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You planning to cross the Blackwood Forest?" Thompson asked, pointing toward the dark line of trees visible through the saloon's grimy window. Jacob nodded. "Fastest route to the Pecos Valley." Thompson shook his head slowly. "Maybe so, but it ain't the safest. Apache been active in those woods. 3 men went missing last month. Found one of them tied to a tree, scalped clean. The other two, well, we never found them at all." A drunk cowboy at the end of the bar laughed bitterly. "Tell him about the Apache woman, Thompson. Tell him about the ghost that hunts alone." Thompson shot the drunk a warning look, but the damage was done. Jacob's curiosity was piqued. "What Apache woman?" "Local legend," Thompson said dismissively. "Probably just talk, but some of the surviving cavalry boys swear they've seen her. A female warrior, hunting alone. They say she don't kill like the others. She toys with her prey first." The drunk cowboy staggered closer. "My brother Charlie saw her. Said she was beautiful as a sunset and twice as deadly. She followed him for 2 days through them woods, before he made it out. Never shot at him, never called for help, just watched, like she was deciding something." Jacob finished his whiskey and left 2 silver coins on the bar. "I appreciate the warning, but I've got to keep moving." As he walked toward the door, Thompson called after him. "If you see her, son, don't try to fight, and don't try to run. Charlie says she respects courage, but she's got no patience for cowards." Jacob spent that night at the edge of town, his horse tethered nearby, staring up at stars that seemed impossibly bright and cold. He had faced Apache warriors before during his cavalry days. They were fierce fighters, but they followed patterns, moved in groups, struck with purpose. A lone female warrior hunting for sport didn't fit anything he knew about Apache warfare. But the West was full of stories that didn't make sense until they tried to kill you. So when morning came, Jacob checked his Colt revolver, made sure his rifle was loaded, and rode toward the Blackwood Forest with the careful attention of a man who had learned to trust his instincts above all else. The forest swallowed him like a living thing. Towering pines blocked out most of the sun, creating a maze of shadow and filtered light that played tricks on the eyes. Jacob's horse, a reliable bay named Dusty, grew nervous within the first mile. Her ears swiveled constantly, and she shied at sounds Jacob couldn't hear. The trail was clear enough generations of hunters and travelers had worn a path through the trees. But something about the silence felt wrong. In healthy woods, there should be bird calls, squirrel chatter, the buzz of insects. Here, the only sounds were Dusty's hoofbeats and the creak of leather. By midday, Jacob was certain he was being followed. It started as a feeling, the kind of awareness that had kept him alive during Apache raids. Then came the small signs, a broken twig that looked too fresh, hoof prints in soft earth that weren't quite weathered enough to be old, the occasional glimpse of movement in his peripheral vision that vanished when he turned to look. Jacob reined in Dusty near a small clearing and listened. Nothing. But the feeling persisted, crawling up his spine like cold fingers. He had two choices: turn back and lose precious time, or push forward and deal with whatever was shadowing him. He chose to push forward. The attack came without warning. An arrow whistled past his ear, close enough that he felt the feathers brush his skin. Jacob threw himself from the saddle, rolled behind a fallen log, and came up with his Colt drawn. Dusty bolted deeper into the trees, leaving him stranded. "Show yourself," Jacob called out, his voice echoing strangely in the cathedral silence of the pines. The answer came as movement fluid, almost supernatural. A figure slipped between the trees 50 yards away, there for a heartbeat and then gone. But in that brief glimpse, Jacob saw enough to stop his breath cold. It was a woman, an Apache woman, dressed in buckskin and carrying a bow that looked like it had been carved from the bones of the forest itself. Her black hair was braided with feathers and beads, and her face was painted with red and yellow war markings that made her look like something from a warrior's nightmare. But it was her eyes that held him. Even at that distance, even in the dappled forest light, they burned with an intensity that spoke of intelligence, calculation, and something else, something that made Jacob's hand tremble on his gun. She wasn't trying to kill him. Not yet. She was studying him. Jacob stayed behind the log for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. No more arrows came, no war cries. No sound at all, except his own rapid breathing and the distant call of a hawk circling high above the trees. When he finally worked up the courage to peer over the log, she was gone. But Jacob knew she was still there, somewhere in the green shadows, watching and waiting. He found Dusty a quarter mile down the trail, standing near a stream with her reins tangled in a low branch. The horse was spooked but unharmed. Jacob approached her slowly, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. As he reached for Dusty's bridle, he saw it a single eagle feather stuck into the bark of a pine tree at eye level. It hadn't been there when he passed this spot an hour ago. The message was clear. "I could have killed you, but I chose not to." Jacob pulled the feather free and studied it. The quill was still warm. The chase began in earnest as the sun reached its peak. Jacob mounted Dusty and urged her forward at a steady trot, not fast enough to exhaust the horse, but quick enough to make pursuit difficult. Behind him, he could sense the Apache woman following, always just out of sight but never far away. She was better than the cavalry scouts he had known, better than the Apache trackers who had taught him how to read sign. She moved through the forest like smoke, leaving no trail Jacob could follow, but somehow always knowing exactly where he was. The psychological pressure was worse than any physical attack. Jacob's nerves stretched tighter with each mile. Every shadow could hide an archer. Every sound could signal an ambush. His hand cramped from gripping his revolver, and his shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool forest air. But gradually, Jacob began to understand something that chilled him more than the prospect of death. She wasn't hunting him to kill him. She was testing him, testing his endurance, his courage, his ability to think under pressure. Like a predator evaluating prey, but with a purpose that went beyond simple survival. Late in the afternoon, Jacob made his first serious mistake. Dusty stumbled on loose rocks while crossing a narrow creek, and Jacob's attention shifted to keeping his seat. In that moment of distraction, the Apache woman struck, not with an arrow, but with her presence. When Jacob looked up from steadying his horse, she was standing on the far bank of the creek, not 30 feet away. Her bow was lowered, arrow nocked, but not drawn. She stood perfectly still, studying him with those burning dark eyes. Up close, she was even more striking than Jacob had imagined. She was tall for a woman, with the lean, muscled build of someone who lived by strength and speed. Her buckskin dress was decorated with intricate beadwork and fitted close to her body. Her face, beneath the war paint, was beautiful in a way that spoke of wildness and danger. High cheekbones, full lips, and skin the color of honey in sunlight. But it was her posture that told the real story. She stood like a queen surveying her domain, utterly confident and completely in control. This was her territory, her game, her rules. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the water. Jacob's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but something in her expression stopped him. She tilted her head slightly, like a bird considering an interesting puzzle, and then she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had found exactly what she was looking for. Before Jacob could react, she melted back into the trees, leaving him alone with the sound of running water and his own thundering heartbeat. That evening, as darkness gathered in the forest depths, Jacob made camp in a small clearing where he could see anyone approaching. He didn't dare risk a fire, so he ate cold jerky and tried to ignore the way every night sound seemed amplified and threatening. She visited him in the dark. Jacob woke to find her sitting across from his bedroll, her bow resting across her knees. Moonlight filtered through the pine needles, creating a pattern of silver and shadow that made her look like a spirit conjured from the forest itself. "You're not Apache," she said in perfect English, her voice carrying only the faintest trace of an accent. Jacob's hand was already on his gun, but he didn't draw it. Something told him that would be a fatal mistake. "No," he said carefully. "I'm just passing through." She studied him for a moment that stretched like eternity. "I know what you are. Cavalry. I can smell the iron and gunpowder on you. I can see the way you move, the way you watch the trees. You've fought my people before." "I have," Jacob admitted, "but that war's behind me now." "Is it?" She leaned forward slightly, and Jacob caught a glimpse of something that might have been pain in her dark eyes. "My husband fell to cavalry sabers 2 winters ago. Should I care that you've left their service?" The question hung between them like a blade. Jacob understood now why she hadn't killed him immediately. This was personal, but not in the way he had expected. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and meant it, "but I can't bring him back. And killing me won't either." She was quiet for so long that Jacob began to wonder if she had disappeared again. Then she spoke, her voice softer than before. "No, but you could take his place." The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. "What?" "I am Aiyana," she said, and the name seemed to carry weight in the night air. "I am daughter of the war chief Nalnish, widow of the warrior Bidziel. By Apache law, I have the right to choose a new husband if I can find a man worthy of the honor." Jacob's mind reeled. "You're not hunting me to kill me. You're hunting me to marry me." Aiyana's smile returned, sharp and dangerous. "The hunt is how we judge worthiness. Any man can claim to be brave. Any man can boast of his strength. But only in the chase do we see who a man truly is. And if I fail your test, then you die." She said it so matter-of-factly that Jacob felt his blood turn to ice water. "But you haven't failed yet, Matthew Jacob. You've shown courage without recklessness, determination without stupidity. You haven't tried to run like a rabbit or attack like a mad dog. You think before you act." The fact that she knew his name shouldn't have surprised him, but it did. "How long have you been watching me?" "Since before you entered my forest. I choose carefully, cavalryman. This is not a game." Aiyana rose to her feet with fluid grace, her bow never wavering. "Tomorrow, the real test begins. If you survive it, if you prove yourself worthy, then you will have a choice to make. Take a wife and a new life, or die in the attempt." She stepped backward into the shadows, but her voice drifted back to him one last time. "Sleep well, Matthew Jacob. You'll need your strength." When Jacob woke at dawn, she was gone. But tied to a tree branch above his head was a leather pouch containing dried meat, wild berries, and what looked like medicinal herbs. Food for the journey ahead. The message was clear. The test was about to begin. Jacob broke camp quickly and resumed his journey deeper into the forest. But now everything had changed. This wasn't just about crossing the woods anymore. This was about survival in a game whose rules he barely understood. The first test came within an hour of sunrise. Jacob's trail led to a narrow canyon where flash floods had carved a passage between towering rock walls. It was a natural ambush site, the kind of place where a smart warrior could trap an entire cavalry unit with a handful of well-placed arrows. Jacob dismounted and led Dusty forward on foot, every sense straining for signs of danger. The canyon walls rose 30 feet on either side, decorated with ancient pictographs that seemed to watch his progress with painted eyes. Halfway through the passage, he heard the unmistakable sound of rocks falling from above. Jacob looked up just in time to see a boulder the size of a water barrel tumbling toward him and his horse. He reacted without thinking, diving forward and pulling Dusty with him. The boulder crashed into the canyon floor inches behind them, shattering into fragments that peppered their backs with stone chips. But the danger wasn't over. As Jacob struggled to his feet, more rocks began falling, not random rock slides, but carefully aimed projectiles meant to test his reflexes and decision-making. He wove between them, protecting his horse and himself with quick thinking and quicker feet. When they finally emerged from the canyon, both man and horse were battered but alive. And there, standing on a ledge 50 feet above, was Aiyana. She raised one hand in what might have been acknowledgement or salute, then disappeared over the ridge. Test 1 passed. The second test came at midday, in a grove where the trees grew so thick that sunlight barely penetrated to the forest floor. Jacob's horse began showing signs of distress, foaming at the mouth, stumbling, breathing heavily. At first he thought it was exhaustion, but then he noticed the plants. Deadly nightshade, Indian tobacco, plants that could kill a horse with a few mouthfuls, growing in seemingly natural abundance along the trail. But Jacob's cavalry training had included lessons in poisonous flora, and he recognized the setup immediately. This wasn't a natural grove. Someone had cultivated these plants here, creating a gauntlet that would test whether he had the knowledge to recognize danger and the wisdom to act on that knowledge. Jacob dismounted and led Dusty carefully through the grove, avoiding the toxic plants and searching for safe grazing. It took nearly an hour to find a clear path, and by the time they emerged, both horse and rider were thirsty and exhausted, but they were alive. And again, Aiyana was there to witness his success, a shadow among shadows who melted away as soon as he spotted her. Test 2 passed. The third test nearly killed him. It came in the form of a grizzly bear 8 feet of muscle, claws, and bad temper that emerged from a thicket just as Jacob was watering his horse at a stream. The bear was old, scarred from countless fights, and clearly not afraid of humans. Jacob's first instinct was to reach for his rifle, but something made him hesitate. This felt wrong, too convenient. Grizzlies didn't usually attack without provocation, and this one's behavior seemed directed. Then he saw the fresh scratches on nearby trees, the scattered fish bones that had been placed as bait, the subtle signs that this encounter had been arranged. Somewhere nearby, Aiyana was watching to see how he would handle a situation where violence might not be the answer. Instead of drawing his weapon, Jacob slowly backed away from the stream, keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. He spoke to the bear in low, steady tones, the way he had learned to gentle spooked horses. The animal snorted and huffed, but didn't charge. When Jacob had put enough distance between himself and the bear's territory, the massive creature simply turned and lumbered back into the thicket. No attack, no violence. Just a test of judgment and restraint. Test 3 passed. As evening approached, Jacob realized he was no longer in the same forest he had entered 3 days ago. The landscape had changed, becoming more rugged and wild. Ancient petroglyphs covered boulder faces, and the very air seemed to hum with spiritual energy. He was in sacred Apache territory now, and Aiyana was about to reveal the true purpose of her hunt. She appeared as the sun touched the horizon, stepping out of the gathering shadows like a goddess of the wilderness. But now, she wasn't alone. Behind her came 6 Apache warriors, their faces painted for war, their weapons ready. "Matthew Jacob," Aiyana said formally, "you have passed the tests of courage, wisdom, and restraint. But now comes the final challenge. My people must judge whether you are worthy to join our tribe, worthy to take the place of a fallen warrior." The eldest of the warriors, a man whose gray hair was braided with eagle feathers, stepped forward. I am Nalnish, war chief of the Chiricahua, father of Aiyana. My daughter says you would make a worthy husband, but the tribe must decide. Jacob looked from face to face, seeing curiosity, suspicion, and something that might have been hope. These people had lost much to the advancing tide of white settlement. They were deciding whether to trust their future to a former enemy. I make no promises about becoming Apache, Jacob said carefully. But I promise this: if you accept me, I'll stand with you. If you reject me, I'll leave in peace and never speak of this place to any white man. Nalnish smiled, the first genuinely warm expression Jacob had seen since entering the forest. Wisdom and honesty. My daughter chose better than I expected. But before anyone could respond, the sound of gunshots echoed through the trees. Distant, but getting closer. A lot of guns, firing fast and wild. Bounty hunters, one of the warriors hissed. They found our trail. Aiyana's face went hard as stone. They followed you, she said to Jacob, accusation clear in her voice. No, Jacob replied firmly. I was careful. Someone else led them here. But there was no time for arguments. Through the trees came the sound of horses crashing through underbrush and men shouting orders. A lot of men, heavily armed and moving fast. The final test was about to begin, and this time, it would be measured in blood. Jacob's mind raced as the sounds of pursuit grew closer. 12 riders, at least, maybe more, moving through the forest with the reckless haste of men who thought they had their prey cornered. These weren't cavalry. Cavalry would move with more discipline. These were bounty hunters, the kind of men who killed Apache for the scout money and asked questions later. How many? Nalish asked one of his scouts, who had melted away to gather intelligence and returned like morning mist. 15 men, well armed. They have Tonkawa trackers with them. Jacob cursed under his breath. Tonkawa scouts were deadly enemies of the Apache, willing to track their ancient foes for white men's gold. They would know Apache tactics, Apache hiding places. This wasn't going to be a simple matter of disappearing into the forest. There's something else, the scout continued. They're being led by a white man who knows these woods. Someone who's been here before. Aiyana's eyes met Jacob's, and he saw the question there. Not me, he said firmly. I've never been in this territory before. But he thought about his journey, about the people who might have known his route. Thompson, the bartender in Willow Creek. He knew I was heading this way. Gold makes men do terrible things, Nalnish said grimly. We must assume they know we're here. The war chief's demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the contemplative father evaluating his daughter's choice. In his place stood a battle leader who had survived decades of warfare. Aiyana, take 2 warriors and circle south. Try to get behind them. The rest of us will make a stand at Eagle Rock. But Jacob shook his head. That's what they'll expect. Apache tactics. They'll be ready for that. He looked at the assembled warriors, seeing experienced fighters who had learned to trust their instincts. How well did these bounty hunters know the land? Well enough to find us, one warrior replied bitterly. But not well enough to predict us, Jacob continued. They're counting on standard Apache responses. What if we don't give them what they expect? Aiyana stepped closer, her expression intense. What are you suggesting? A frontal attack. Fast, hard, before they can set up an ambush. They'll expect you to fade into the forest and pick them off from hiding. They won't expect a direct assault. The Apache warriors exchanged glances. It was a risky plan, the kind that could either break the enemy or get them all killed. You would fight beside us? Nalnish asked. Against your own people? Jacob's jaw tightened. These aren't my people. My people don't murder for bounty money. He checked his weapons, rifle loaded, revolver ready, knife sharp. Besides, someone needs to watch Aiyana's back. The Apache woman's painted face showed the ghost of a smile. Perhaps my choice was wiser than I knew. They moved through the forest like spirits of war. 7 fighters spread in a loose line that could strike like lightning or disperse like smoke as the situation demanded. Jacob found himself paired with Aiyana, matching her fluid movement through the trees, learning to read the forest the way she did. The bounty hunters had made camp in a clearing beside a small lake, confident in their numbers and firepower. Jacob counted 16 men. Just as the scout had reported, plus 3 Tonkawa trackers who were studying the ground for signs of their quarry. "They don't know we're here yet," Aiyana whispered, her breath warm against Jacob's ear. "But they will soon. The Tonkawa are good." Through the trees, Jacob could see the leader of the group, a big man with a salt and pepper beard who sat his horse like he owned the world. Around his saddle hung Apache scalps, men and women both, dried hair fluttering in the evening breeze like grisly trophies. Jacob's blood turned cold. These weren't just bounty hunters, they were butchers. "The bearded one is called Slade," one of the Apache warriors hissed. "He has been hunting our people for 2 years. 23 of our tribe have died by his hand." "Not tonight," Aiyana said, her voice carrying the certainty of a prophecy. "Tonight, Slade dies." Nalnish had positioned his warriors in a rough semicircle around the camp, close enough to strike but far enough away to avoid being trapped if the attack failed. At his signal, the call of a nighthawk, they would attack simultaneously from 3 directions. Jacob found himself thinking about his old cavalry days, about the difference between fighting for honor and fighting for survival. These bounty hunters had no honor. They killed for money, took scalps as trophies, and would murder women and children without hesitation. This wasn't a war between civilizations. This was good men fighting monsters. The hawk call pierced the evening air. Jacob rose from behind his cover and opened fire with his rifle, the shot taking one of the bounty hunters clean out of his saddle. Around the clearing, muzzle flashes erupted like deadly stars as the Apache attack began. The bounty hunters, caught completely off guard, scattered like startled cattle. Some tried to reach their horses. Others dove for cover behind trees and rocks. But they were tough men who had survived by being quick and ruthless, and they rallied faster than Jacob had hoped. A bullet whined past his ear as he worked the lever of his rifle, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round. Beside him, Aiyana moved like a dancer of death, her bow singing as arrow after arrow found its mark. "The Tonkawa," she called out, pointing toward 3 figures who were flanking around the clearing's edge. "They're trying to get behind us." Jacob pivoted and drew his Colt, the familiar weight of the revolver steady in his hand. The Tonkawa scouts were good, but they were focused on the Apache positions. They didn't see the white man who had thrown his lot in with their enemies. Jacob's first shot dropped the lead scout at 30 yards. His second caught another tracker as the man tried to bring his rifle to bear. The third Tonkawa dove for cover, but Aiyana's arrow found him before he could find safety. "Slade's running," one of the warriors called out. Jacob looked toward the horses and saw the bearded leader mounting up, clearly intending to abandon his men and save his own skin. Around the clearing, the remaining bounty hunters were falling back, their position untenable under the fierce Apache assault. But Slade's escape route would take him directly past Jacob's position. Jacob stepped out from behind his tree as the big man thundered past on his horse. "Slade!" The bounty hunter turned in his saddle, his face twisted with rage and fear. He fired twice with a heavy pistol, the bullets chipping bark from the pine where Jacob had been standing a heartbeat before. Jacob's return shot took Slade high in the chest, spinning him around and dumping him from his horse to land hard among the pine needles and forest debris. The bounty hunter leader tried to crawl toward his fallen weapon, but Jacob was already there, kicking the gun away and standing over the dying man. "You want to know something funny?" Jacob said, his voice cold as winter wind. "I used to be cavalry. I used to think you men were doing necessary work, keeping the frontier safe." He looked at the scalps scattered around Slade's body, at the trophies of murder and brutality. "I was wrong." Slade's eyes glazed over, and he died there among the trees he had desecrated with his presence. Around the clearing, the battle was ending. Of the 16 bounty hunters, only 3 remained alive, and they were fleeing into the forest on foot, abandoning their horses and equipment in their desperation to escape. "Let them go," Nailnish commanded as some of his warriors moved to pursue. "Let them carry word of what happens to those who hunt Apache for gold." Aiyana appeared at Jacob's side, a cut on her cheek, but otherwise unharmed. "You fought well, cavalryman, like a true warrior." Jacob looked down at Slade's body, at the scalps that would never be claimed by family, at the waste and cruelty that had brought them all to this moment. "I fought like a man who finally understands what he's fighting for." The war chief approached, his weathered face showing approval. You have proven yourself in the final test, Matthew Jacob. You have bled beside us, killed our enemies, shown that your loyalty is stronger than the color of your skin. Jacob felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like a ceremonial robe. What happens now? Aiyana stepped closer, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight from the abandoned bounty hunter camp. Now you choose. You can take your horse and ride away. No one will pursue you. No one will speak of what happened here. You'll be free to live your old life. Or? Jacob asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. Or you stay. You become Apache. You take me as your wife and this tribe as your family. You learn our ways, fight our battles, share our future. She paused, studying his face in the flickering light. But understand, there is no going back. If you choose this path, Matthew Jacob dies here in these woods. You will be reborn as something new. Jacob looked around at the warriors who had fought beside him, at Nalnish who had accepted him despite their people's history of conflict, at Aiyana who had hunted him through the forest and found him worthy of her dangerous love. His old life lay behind him, failed cattle drives, unpaid debts, the endless wandering of a man with no true home. Ahead lay something he had never expected to find, a place where he belonged, people who valued what he could offer, a woman who had tested his courage and found it sufficient. I choose to stay, he said simply. Aiyana's smile could have lit up the entire forest. She stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest, directly over his heart. Then, welcome home, my husband. The Apache wedding ceremony took place 3 days later, as autumn painted the mountain leaves in shades of gold and crimson. They held it at a sacred place high in the mountains, where ancient spirits were said to witness the binding of souls. Jacob had spent those 3 days learning Apache customs, struggling with the language, and trying to understand the complex web of relationships that held the tribe together. It was harder than any cavalry training he had endured, but infinitely more rewarding. Nalish performed the ceremony himself, chanting in Apache while dancers moved around a central fire that had been burning since sunset. Jacob wore traditional Apache clothing, buckskin pants, and shirt decorated with intricate beadwork that told the story of his trials in the forest. Aiyana was radiant in white deerskin dress that seemed to glow in the firelight. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, decorated with eagle feathers and silver ornaments that caught the dancing flames. She looked like a goddess of the wilderness, beautiful and dangerous and utterly devoted to the man she had chosen. When Nalnish pronounced them husband and wife, according to Apache law, Aiyana placed a bear claw necklace around Jacob's neck, the symbol of a warrior earned through courage in battle. You are no longer Matthew Jacob, she said solemnly. Your Apache name is Bidziel Naaki Strong II, the warrior who took my first husband's place not through conquest but through worthiness. Jacob now Bidziel Naaki felt the truth of it settle into his bones. He was not the same man who had ridden into the forest a week ago. That man had been searching for something he couldn't name. This man had found it. As the ceremony ended and the celebration began, husband and wife slipped away from the crowd to stand at the edge of the mountain clearing. Below them, the forest stretched out like a dark green ocean, vast and wild and full of possibility. Do you regret your choice? Aiyana asked, leaning against his shoulder. Never, Jacob replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. You hunted me through those woods and found exactly what I didn't know I was looking for. She laughed, the sound like silver bells in the mountain air. I told you I'd choose carefully, my husband. I knew from the first moment I saw you that you were meant to be mine. How could you know that? Aiyana turned to face him, her eyes bright with mischief and love. Because you didn't run like a rabbit or attack like a mad dog. You thought before you acted. You showed courage without cruelty, strength without brutality, and when the time came to choose sides, you chose honor over safety. Jacob pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, as if they had been carved from the same tree. The Apache woman hunted the cowboy through the lonely woods, he said softly. And then she chose him as her husband, and they lived dangerously ever after. Aiyana whispered against his lips. In the distance, wolves howled at the rising moon, welcoming the new warrior to their wild and ancient world. And somewhere in the forest below, 2 horses grazed peacefully in a moonlit meadow. Dusty, the cavalry horse who had carried a lost man to his destiny, and Warpaint, the Apache mare who would carry him into his future. The hunt was over. The choice had been made. And in the heart of the American wilderness, love had triumphed over hatred, understanding over prejudice, and courage over fear. The story would be told around Apache fires for generations, how a woman warrior chose her own husband, how a white soldier found his true tribe, and how the Wild West was tamed not by guns and gold, but by the ancient magic of two souls recognizing each other across the vast distances of culture and conflict. In the end, the forest had given up its greatest secret. Sometimes the most dangerous hunt leads not to death, but to the one thing worth living for. And sometimes, being chosen is the greatest victory of all.